You know, whoever said politics is a lot like high school was really onto something. Over the last week, we've had this craze for empty bipartisan symbolism, with everybody searching around for a BFF from across the aisle that they can sit next to at the speech. And right before the speech, the big news was that Nancy Pelosi couldn't go with Eric Cantor because she already had a date. But this is stupid. And politics is contentious. It ought to be. I mean, there are big things at stake. The American ship of state is sinking under unsustainable debt, and these folks are reshuffling the deck chairs.
We are part of the American family. We believe that in a country where every race and faith and point of view can be found, we are still bound together as one people. That we share common hopes and a common creed.
Pay close attention to what President Obama says. An American family is composed of parents and children. Could he mean that the federal government is the parents and we are the children? America is bound and was founded in a common creed that focuses on individual liberty and limited government. We are not a family. We are a nation of individuals.
The more we export, the more jobs we create here at home. At stake is whether new jobs and industries take root in this country or somewhere else. We want innovation to produce jobs in America and not overseas.
This isn't the worst rhetoric I've heard from the president on trade, but it's not good. And it reflects this zero-sum thinking on competitiveness, which has been discredited for centuries.
We measure progress by the success of our people, by the jobs they can find and the quality of life those jobs offer.
By that yardstick, Obama failed. He promised us if we gave him a big government stimulus, we'd have unemployment of less than 8%. Instead, it's been over 9.5% for over a year.
Thanks to the tax cuts we passed, Americans' paychecks are a little bigger today.
I'm glad the president went along with the Republicans in extending the tax cuts for a couple of years, but 1 million net job creation is far too low to actually bring the unemployment rate down. We need to reduce the burden of government spending as well.
We know what it takes to compete for the jobs and industries of our time. We need to out-innovate, out-educate, and out-build the rest of the world.
We cannot out-innovate, out-educate, and out-build the rest of the world if all the government policies do is to encourage Americans to out-consume the rest of the world.
With more research and incentives, we can break our dependence on oil with biofuels. And to help pay for it, I'm asking Congress to eliminate the billions in taxpayer dollars we currently give to oil companies.
How about just not subsidizing anybody? Let's let the market decide what energy is most efficient for the American economy.
And we also have to win the race to educate our kids.
If we want to win the race to educate our kids, one thing is abundantly clear. The federal government needs to get out of education. It's been involved for 40 years, it's spent lots of money, and in all that time, we haven't gotten a single improvement in learning outcomes, and that's what's most important.
We launched a competition called Race to the Top. To all 50 states, we said, if you show us the most innovative plans to improve teacher quality and student achievement, we'll show you the money.
Race to the Top is really just federal policy over the last 40 years in a nutshell. It said, states, promise you'll do good things and we're going to give you money. It was about plans. It was nothing about actual education.
Race to the Top is the most meaningful reform of our public schools in a generation.
And the only thing that Race to the Top did of substance was it got states to promise to adopt national curriculum standards. So for the first time, the federal government is dictating what kids in every public school in America will learn, and it's been done through Race to the Top.
We're also revitalizing America's community colleges.
Community colleges do a terrible job of educating people, getting them to complete the programs that they enter, yet the president lionizes them. And that's the same thing we do with higher education across the board. The government pours money into schools and pours money into students and ignores the massive waste and inefficiency that is ingrained in American higher education.
We've begun rebuilding for the 21st century. A project that has meant thousands of good jobs for the hard-hit construction industry. And tonight I'm proposing that we redouble those efforts.
This is just a different way of saying he wants another stimulus, build bridges to nowhere. Well, guess what? So-called stimulus didn't work for Bush in 2008, it didn't work for Obama in 2009, and guess what? It's not going to work in 2011 either.
Within 25 years, our goal is to give 80% of Americans access to high-speed rail. For some trips, it'll be faster than flying, without the pat-down.
That's actually not funny. The chief executive is joking about the procedures that his TSA screeners are using. And now that we're putting TSA screening checkpoints in train stations and bus depots, you are in fact no longer free to move about the country.
Get rid of the loopholes, level the playing field, and use the savings to lower the corporate tax rate for the first time in 25 years without adding to our deficit.
That's a great sentiment. We know that European countries have average corporate tax rates of less than 25%, and we're nearly 40%, so we're shooting ourselves in the foot.
And last month, we finalized a trade agreement with South Korea that will support at least 70,000 American jobs.
What President Obama is bragging about here is the fact that he renegotiated the US-Korea Free Trade Agreement to make it less free. And there's nothing in this speech about how he actually intends to move these other free trade agreements forward.
Now, I have heard rumors that a few of you still have concerns about our new health care law. So let me be the first to say that anything can be improved. If you have ideas about how to improve this law by making care better or more affordable, I am eager to work with you.
There's nothing Congress can do to improve the quality, cost, or security of health care for people under age 65 as long as Obamacare remains on the books. The only way to improve Obamacare is to repeal it.
What I'm not willing to do is go back to the days when insurance companies could deny someone coverage because of a pre-existing condition.
Obamacare is denying coverage to people with pre-existing conditions and healthy people too. It's caused insurers to flee the market for child-only coverage, making it harder for parents to insure their children. It's caused one SEIU local in New York to drop dependent coverage for 6,000 kids, leaving them with no health insurance.
Nonpartisan economists have said that repealing the health care law would add $250 billion to our deficit.
The Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, President Obama's own chief Medicare actuary, and even the International Monetary Fund have all discredited the idea that Obamacare reduces the deficit.
I am proposing that starting this year, we freeze annual domestic spending for the next 5 years.
Thanks to Bush and Obama, we've had a 10-year spending binge, which has pushed the federal budget from $1.8 trillion all the way up to $3.7 trillion. How about instead of just a spending freeze, we cut programs, get rid of departments, actually do what our founding fathers wanted and have a very limited central government.
Already we've frozen the salaries of hard-working federal employees for the next 2 years.
Actually, all the president has talked about so far is reducing cost of living adjustments. He hasn't talked about the other way that you increase bureaucrat pay, which is something called step adjustments, increasing their job classification. But the real issue is that total compensation for federal workers is twice as high as for people in the productive sector of the economy. We need to reduce the pay for government bureaucrats, and we need to shrink the number of bureaucrats.
The Secretary of Defense has also agreed to cut tens of billions of dollars in spending that he and his generals believe our military can do without.
That's just not true. He's actually asked for increased defense spending next year. It's going to be well over $500 billion. What he said, the Secretary of Defense, is that he's going to slow the rate of increase in defense spending. Only in Washington is that a cut. We're getting more defense spending than we had last year.
Cutting the deficit by gutting our investments in innovation and education is like lightening an overloaded airplane by removing its engine.
Dropping the engine? This is more like dropping the bathroom after a very long flight. Cutting federal education spending is getting rid of the waste.
Now, most of the cuts and savings I proposed only address annual domestic spending, which represents a little more than 12% of our budget. To make further progress, we have to stop pretending that cutting this kind of spending alone will be enough.
Why doesn't the president just say what else we ought to cut? The defense budget is full of programs that we could get rid of. 2/3 of discretionary spending go to defense or security, including veterans and homeland security. So I think he ought to outline those cuts rather than just vaguely alluding to them.
To put us on solid ground, we should also find a bipartisan solution to strengthen Social Security for future generations.
The president left Social Security reform almost completely out of his speech, but he should have included it, I think, because we know the program's benefits begin too early given how long Americans live today compared to when the program started. And the program's structure treats women, minorities, and two-earner families unfairly.
We simply can't afford a permanent extension of the tax cuts for the wealthiest 2% of Americans. Before we take money away from our schools or scholarships away from our students, we should ask millionaires to give up their tax break.
Let's set aside the president's upside-down moral view about government owning all the money we earn and just focus on his class warfare approach. We already have the top 10% in this country paying about 70% of the personal income tax burden, and yet he wants to hit them again and again. Is that really a recipe for more innovation, investment, and entrepreneurship in America?
In Afghanistan, our troops have taken Taliban strongholds and trained Afghan security forces.
The president's making an argument for his strategy in Afghanistan, which involves spending about $120 billion a year on a country that has a $14 billion a year GDP. The president has enunciated no clear end state for U.S. involvement in that country, no clear exit strategy, and has no political strategy to make the overall approach a success. To my mind, that's an irresponsible use of his power as Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Armed Forces.
Because Republicans and Democrats approved the New START treaty, far fewer nuclear weapons and launchers will be deployed.
That's just not true. Under the START treaty, we're not getting rid of hardly any delivery vehicles or warheads. We can make far deeper cuts to the arsenal at no cost to our security.
Tonight, let us speak with one voice in reaffirming that our nation is united in support of our troops and their families. Let us serve them as well as they've served us.
So the president seems to have decided, probably correctly, that wrapping himself in the flag is a good political strategy. But his greatest responsibility to the men and women in the armed forces is to only deploy them when they have a clear, achievable end state tied to the strategy they've been asked to pursue. Unfortunately, in Afghanistan, there's very little evidence that he's done that.
The State of the Union was never intended to be such a big deal. For over 100 years, from Jefferson to Woodrow Wilson, presidents literally mailed the thing in. They just had it copied by hand and messengered over to the Capitol. Maybe next year he could do us all a favor and just text it over.